What's going on, y'all? Happy Sunday. This is the upcoming earnings schedule for this week. We have a few different companies reporting. The most important one is going to be NVDA on Wednesday after the close. Other than that, I'm not interested in too much myself. Home Depot might get interesting. A couple other stocks, but realistically, like I said, the main focus is going to be into Wednesday on NVIDIA's earnings. I'm going to make a quick little overview of few different stocks. I'm gonna go over some of the futures that are open: SPX, Bitcoin, GJ, USD CAD, gold, oil, and then I'll go over a few stocks and what I'm expecting or preparing for this week. So first things first, we're gonna get started with SPX. We have been chopping into these highs for quite some time. It's been over 3 months into these highs. We have swept the highs, swept the lows, swept the highs. We've been ranging so far, right? So one thing I want to see into this week for SPX, as long as, well, first thing, we have a tiny gap right here. But as long as SPX remains below 6910.6 this week, I would assume for us to keep driving lower into 6735.4. Ideally, you don't really want to be short. If we start reclaiming these levels, they can squeeze us for new all-time highs. And then after they take out the all-time highs, they can have a mean reversion back to the lows. So for this week, let's see what happens on SPX. But ideally, I don't want to be short over 6910.6. As long as we remain below, I think sales will be okay. One thing I will say is generally when generally when names have been accumulating into the highs, something like this, I discussed it with you guys last week. We've been discussing it. You have a lot of accumulation into these highs. You might get one sweep of all the highs just to stop out everyone, get that liquidity. And then after that, we might drive lower. At the same time, we don't have to do that. So just be careful this week if you're, too short. If they were to overthrow to the highs, obviously that would cost you some money on the sales. But if we're below this level, things would probably be fine. Bitcoin, uh, we've been, this is one of the names we've been tracking for quite some time. Shared the sales from 123K. We're now into, the lower targets we've been expecting. We still want to see lower targets, obviously. But for now, we've been ranging into these lows since the breakdown. What I would like to see this week on Bitcoin, as long as we remain below, what happened to my levels? There we go. As long as we stay below 68,850, we should be able to see continuation to the downside. Go fill that 59.930 wick we left on Thursday the 5th. So again, as long as they respect these levels, we should see continuation lower from here. Anywhere above 68,850, you want to be careful if short. They can start reclaiming levels, and obviously there's a huge range to the left hand side, so you don't want to be short here into the lows. Bitcoin, I mentioned, was a great short into 123K. At this point, I am not actively shorting Bitcoin myself. I think SPX is a much more attractive trade, and there are many other trades that you can be taking for some sales as opposed to shorting Bitcoin into the lows. I still think this name is headed much lower. But for this week, as long as we stay below 68,850, we'll see what happens. And again, if you guys are trading this actively, whether you're holding some Bitcoin for the long term or just scalping some futures, whatever the case may be, these are going to be your active levels to watch. As far as GJ goes, this is another name that had some pretty clean sales not too long ago. One thing I do want to cover real quick, I discussed this with you guys last week. I mentioned currencies tend to lead markets, and at this point in time, GJ is leading SPX to the downside. Let's go on to daily so you guys can see this a little better. Not the best. That's fine. So as you guys can see, slightly not the best. Again, in purple and orange, you have SPX. SPX is still sitting into these highs, while we already had GJ have this correction down into the lows. So for this point, I am interested in sales on SPX. I still want to see GJ potentially head a little lower, but GJ is leading to the downside at the moment. So realistically, I believe SPX is going to have a similar move like this one we just had on GJ. Similar pattern. We've been chopping into these highs, not as long, but SPX has been chopping into the highs, right? So chopping. and then we finally got that breakdown. So this SPY again might have a similar setup, chopping into the highs, chopping into the highs. All we would need was that breakdown into about 67.35.4 or lower. Realistically, for SPX to catch up to GJ, we need to see it all the way into these lows, 65.10.4. So we'll see what happens in the coming days. But ideally, I would love to see SPX 500 into 65.10.4, and that would fix the divergence that we have right now in the short-term time frames. Not short-term; it's been a couple weeks. It's about 2 weeks ahead. So ideally, in a week or two, this coming week or the following, into March 6th, we could get SPX into those lower targets. So we'll see what happens with that. But GJ is leading to the downside right now, and I've had that discussion with you guys on how currencies tend to lead. Another pair we've been tracking is USD CAD. We've been mentioning a potential breakout on dollar. We mentioned this into the lows. We had this rally, same way we mentioned the sells on GJ from the highs. What I want to see this week on dollar, if the markets are really going to sell, we would want to see more strength on the dollar. So we have much higher targets on the dollar. I'm not saying it'll go all the way up there, but if we do break out from these highs, dollar should have a pretty strong push to the upside as we see some sell-offs in different equities. So GJ should continue its path down, and dollar should bounce a little higher, assuming equities will fall in the coming weeks. As far as gold, gold had a pretty strong recovery. This one was a beautiful sell. We caught from the highs. We've been tracking the bounce. We wanted to see a potential. I have the little cleaner on GOD. We wanted to see a potential fade on GOD into this zone here, which is the previous weekly high. Ideally, gold can squeeze higher if they want it. I'm not trading gold too actively myself at the moment, but I want to see what happens this week into the 786. So right now we're currently testing the 618, which could be a reversal point, or they could go all the way to 786 before reversing. Realistically, I wouldn't be surprised to see gold push all the way into all-time highs, but that may not happen. So we'll see how this plays out. Ideally, I'm more interested in the sell-off from these highs, but again, I'm not going to be forcing the trade. Whether we sell into the 786 or they go to the all-time highs, we'll see. But again, I'm not forcing gold too much. I'm going to be focusing SPX specifically. For US oil, we mentioned a potential sell last week. Didn't pay crazy, but we did catch that small flip. It paid a bit. Took it via CVX. USO also did decent, but I want to see what happens on oil this week. So for now, there is a small gap here. They may try to close. And then from there on forth, I want to see if they get back below that 65.33 handle. If they do break below that, you have a massive range down to 62. And then if that low is lost, we have this entire range to the downside, which is basically, where we broke out from. So a bit of a ascending trend here, a little bit of resistance overhead. I'm not a huge fan of oil. I've told you guys I don't trade oil too often, but I am watching oil into these highs. See for a potential breakdown from here. One thing I do want to comment on is I mentioned if there is any escalation overseas, do not be surprised to see a huge breakout on oil. So you have targets up here. Again, I'm not going to be actively trading this, but if we have an escalation overseas, be careful with the massive squeeze to the upside. I'm looking for the breakdown, but shorting into here is not ideal because something like this can happen on any escalation. And then Mexico's pretty crazy today, so I want to see how that develops in the coming days. Does Trump comment on it? Does he try to step in? I kind of want to see where that goes. But yeah, things are getting pretty intense over there. And then Iran invasion talks are also at an all-time high. As we are speaking, we have dollar dumping quite a bit. This is a significant dump to a certain degree. So again, I want to see dollar firm up and recover some of this downside. We've rallied all this in about a week, 9 days. So small pullback is not the end of the world. Just ideally, I do want to see this firm up and continue its path up. If we do keep dumping on the dollar and GJ rallies, like I said, that is not ideal to be in sells or puts on SPY. If dollar firms up, starts pushing back towards those highs, as GJ gets rejected and starts pushing lower, then we're going to have a decent opportunity for some sells this week and next on SPY. So GJ, want to see this continue down. And dollar, as mentioned, we want to see this firm up, form some type of support, and head back towards the highs. So we'll see how that plays out this week, but those names are going to be pretty important. And then as far as SPY goes, it's going to be the same thing as SPX. I already covered it a little bit. I'm not going to waste too much time on it. But one thing I do want to point out is we have a wick on SPY. Let me see if there it is. So we have a wick to 697.24, which I would not be surprised if they fill that. If we get a bullish scenario on NVIDIA this week, which I will cover in a second, I would not be surprised to see that wick filled and maybe even higher. I've mentioned a 705 target, which I currently have turned off, but matter of fact, let's see. I'm not going to waste time on it, but yeah, we can see a squeeze into 705 before we get that final breakdown on NVIDIA this week. So just FYI, be super careful if short. The problem with earnings is they report after hours. If you have options, you're pretty much at the mercy of the markets. If NVIDIA wants to gap up 10%, 5%, and I'll show those targets in a second, you're going to be at a loss on your puts or your sells or whatever. So just be mindful of your sizing this week. Ideally, I still want to see selling pressure, but I would not be surprised if we get a sweep of this buy side liquidity on SPY before heading lower. And then this is the setup on NVIDIA I was discussing. We have a buy side liquidity into 198.73 that we left, I think it was on the 9th. Yeah, Monday the 9th. Excuse me. So we've been chopping into these highs as well on NVIDIA for quite some time, very long time actually. We already swept the highs one time here. So this was a sweep on earnings. No, it was not. I'm lying. This was pretty ahead of earnings. So we swept the highs, and then on earnings we had a bit of a sell, not really, kind of a dud. And now we're chopping within this range. So one thing we got to be careful with this week, especially if you're short, if NVIDIA gives us this push to 198 or maybe even higher, obviously SPY is going to head higher with it, and that would cost you some money on the sales if you are short. So again, the problem with this is we cannot predict. We can try to guess, but at the end of the day, we can't really predict where NVIDIA is going. If NVIDIA pushes higher to fill these wicks or even higher, again, SPY will probably rally a few points with it, and that will cost you some money. If we can get this buy side liquidity after earnings, and SPY also goes for that sweep, I would be very interested in shorting into the highs in NVIDIA and SPY for that move back down to the lows. I've taken a few positions on SOXS. I've discussed that with you guys. Ideally, if NVIDIA is going to come down, SOXS should pay pretty well. So we have been accumulating a few different positions into these lows, mostly stocks, some long dated options. Assuming that SOXS is going to hold these lows and push higher, we should see a breakdown on NVIDIA. So we'll see what happens. SMH is also into the highs. So want to see what happens. Again, if NVIDIA breaks out, so will SMH, so will SPY, so will other names. But at the same time, a lot of these names have been, chopping into these highs for a few months to the point that it makes me think maybe markets are distributing into the highs for the next move down. You want to distribute all of your assets into the highs, and then we could push lower. So we'll see how this plays out. But again, NVIDIA is going to be the main focus this week. Into Wednesday after hours, they report earnings. And again, if you have any open positions, you will be at the mercy of the markets. So that's that. As far as Apple goes, this one had a pretty good pullback off of the highs. Also been ranging for a little bit. We had left some buy side liquidity here, which we went and filled and then immediately rejected off of those highs. We currently left the small range to the left hand side, but we also have south side liquidity that we have left down here. So For Apple specifically, as long as we're under 263.8, I would love to see more continuation down towards 243.42. And then later on, we might even fill some of the lower targets we have on this. So let me show you guys on the daily. You cannot see them on the daily. Or why is my PC slow right now? Oh, here it is. So we have wicks all the way down into, bro, I had just put one there. My bad, my shit is tweaking. I think it's this one here. Into the 240s. So ideally, I still want to see some more selling pressure on Apple on the daily time frame. Once we break below this, you have a massive range to the left, which could take us down all the way to the April lows, which was around 170. That was an insane move on those sells, but again, it's going to be pretty insane if we lose 240. They can head straight down to that 170 zone, which is about a 30% correction. I get it, 30% sounds insane. But when you put it into context, silver fell about 30% in a day, gold about 15. Bitcoin is down probably over 40%, maybe even 50 from all-time highs, probably close to 50. So 30% correction in the markets is not insane. I've been calling for a 30% correction for a while. It's been taking its sweet time, but got to be patient. Realistically, I think that pullback is overdue, and when it does come, into the coming weeks, hopefully, it should be a pretty violent pullback, honestly, if you're on the wrong side of things. So we'll see how that develops. But for Apple, I do want to see continuation below 263.80, back to that 243 zone, and maybe even lower. For Google, this one already had a little bit more of a pullback. We're down how much from the highs? About 10%, nothing insane. But similar comments, as long as we stay below 13.69 this week, we should see some more continuation to the downside. On all these names, you have the potential of a small bounce into highs before reverting lower. So we'll see how this week plays out. I'm not going to be forcing too much in the start of the week. I'll kind of just gauge things, see what the market's feeling, and ultimately, again, into Wednesday before the close, you will have to make that decision where you want your positioning to be. And again, you'll be at the mercy of the markets. I will ultimately hold some sells myself. I'm already in a few different swings. And if I get the opportunity at good prices, I might even scale in this week. But again, ideally, you want to leave room to add after NVDA earnings. In the circumstance that NVIDIA were to rally and break out, you're going to get some discounts on your puts or whatever positions you may be in. So you don't want to go all in. Well, one, you never want to go all in, but you definitely want to leave plenty of room to manage the positions in case we do break out. At the same time, you got to be mindful if you don't put any positions on or you don't have much size or any size at all, and we do break down on NVIDIA, you're gonna miss a pretty nice move, to be honest. So I'd rather risk a small portion of money. If it pays, great. If it goes into drawdown, that's fine. I'll add after the earnings if possible. As far as Microsoft goes, this is a name that is actually down a lot more than the rest of the names. Let me show you this wick on the 192. My PC is being so slow. Okay, so this wick I really don't like. Anytime we leave wicks like this untested, I am not a fan of that. Realistically, I don't think we'll push all the way back into 557 on Microsoft. I think that was just probably a liquidity sweep ahead of earnings, fake some people out, get them long ahead of earnings, and then obviously we had that massive dump. So just keep in mind of that level. But just to show you guys, we're already down 28% on Microsoft, which is pretty insane. Microsoft, I don't know if it was a year ago or two, but they were leading mega cap. There was that Apple and Microsoft had been diverging a little bit past few years. It was pretty significant, I think, in 24, and then Nvidia just came in and took the crown, and it just outgrew Apple and Microsoft. I've mentioned I think Nvidia is a facade. I do not think it should be evaluated at the prices that it is, and realistically, I think it's going to ultimately end up coming down just like the rest of the names. Microsoft down 30%. Apple, again, it's only down about 5 at the moment. This is not the high. No, it's not. Apple is only down about 10%, 12, you know, 10, 11% into these lows, 15. But ideally, if we get a correction like the one we had on Microsoft, this should be trading into 200. And assuming Microsoft is also going to keep dumping since it's already down so much, if the market's going to drop more, then I also expect Microsoft to continue its path down. Not that much, obviously, but for perspective, again, this is already down 30%. So I would not be super surprised to see Apple, NVDA, and a few other names also retrace 30% from all-time highs and maybe even continue heading lower after that. Uh, Amazon down a little bit from the highs. So again, we shall see how this plays out, but many names are already down quite a bit from the highs. I think it's just a matter of the rest of the market, catching up to these names to the downside. There is a potential of these names that already fell recovering. That is definitely a potential, but me personally, I am more focused on the stronger names having a pullback as opposed to trying to bid these names that are already very weak. So I'm not buying dips. I'm not looking for dip buys on Microsoft or any other names that have fallen a lot. I'm more interested in shorting strength. So you have, pretty interesting setup on Amazon. Again, if you're gonna have markets rallying, you can see a push on these names as well. But again, me myself, I'm more focused on shorting strength on specific names. TSM a couple weeks ago, we left this sell side liquidity into 322.10. Ideally, I want to see a continuation lower and a breakdown on TSM. If NVIDIA breaks down, we should see TSM break down as well. So TSM might be a decent trade for a sympathy play on NVIDIA. NVIDIA is going to have slightly more elevated IV because of earnings this week. So I may try a trade on TSM for the potential downside break on that sympathy play for NVIDIA. NVIDIA, if you guys want to trade it, that's fine. Me personally, I'm not too interested in NVIDIA. I'd rather take maybe TSM, and I already have some success positions myself. Meta is another name that is already down a bit off the highs. Not an insane move, but this one's probably down about 20 as well. Yeah, about 20% from the highs. And again, I do believe all of these names could continue their path down, assuming the markets, keep correcting from here. We have somewhat of a head and shoulders pattern. If these lows into 651.32 are lost, you have this entire range to the left hand side that we could ultimately come down and retest. We don't have to break down all the way to the base, but even if we get, maybe about a 50% retracement from high to low, you're talking about 441 or maybe even lower. So still plenty of room for the markets to fall. If you were heavily invested, 401k, Roth IRA, whatever it may be, I've mentioned different strategies to potentially protect yourself from this, but you do want to be careful if you're heavily invested. I was probably one of the most vocal people about Bitcoin crashing when it was into 120s. People were very stubborn. It's fine. But ultimately, I try to help people. I let people know when Bitcoin was above 110, 120, get rid of your shit, sell it, you're up. Now, unfortunately, depending on your cost basis, majority of people are not up on that trade. Even Sailor is down on his BTC position, so just goes to show. But yeah, be careful with your portfolios if you have long-term holds. There's a couple different strategies or ways to go about it, but I would be very careful if you have a big amount of money into those positions. AVGO is one of the names we caught from the highs. We've been tracking this. This was a while ago. This one also dropped about 30%. This name is another name that has a huge downside potential. Assuming NVIDIA does not do well, this should continue its path down. And again, look at these massive ranges that we have left to the left-hand side. So none of these areas have been retested for support. And I think eventually we will go down there. AVGO, I haven't been trading in some time. Not too interested after the pullback. Not a bad trade, but I'm more interested this week on TSM as discussed. And then let's see what else we have on here. Did I cover Tesla? I have not. Okay. Tesla's another name, pulled back quite a bit off the highs and then recovered everything, swept at these highs, and now we swept these highs. Come on, bro. We fell about 55%, then we came, swept those highs. Now at this point that we have swept that previous liquidity, I ultimately do think that Tesla will continue its path down, retest some of those lower targets. If you look at Tesla on a monthly chart, it's a pretty insane chart, to be honest. If you guys have been trading Tesla since 2020 or before that, you guys, Tesla's been in a pretty insane run, and then NVDA kind of took over and stole the show and the attention. NVIDIA is now the biggest market cap in the world, and thus why I'm so interested on this week's earnings. Realistically, I told you guys I want to see some sells, but we do got to be careful. If NVIDIA dumps, again, that's the biggest market cap in the entire world, so that would obviously have an impact on the rest of the markets, whether it's SPY, Tesla, TSM, you name it. I ultimately want to see these names break down and keep dumping on those earnings. So next 2 weeks are going to be pretty important. Berkshire, we also caught from the highs. This one's been kind of trying to recover. It recovered quite a bit, fell about 15%, then recovered. Now we are just chopping into these highs. Ideally, I believe Berkshire will also come down quite a bit. Obviously, we had Warren Buffett step down, a couple other things. So, when we had that first dump, I think it was over the weekend when he announced right here. He announced he was stepping off. We had that pretty clean sell. We are back again up here, recovered a bit of that range, but we still have this entire downside to the left-hand side. So be careful with Berkshire. If we break down from here, we can see much lower prices. And I'm just showing you guys the biggest market caps in the world that I'm currently focused on. Walmart, I issued it last week. It paid pretty well off of those highs. We had earnings, recovered majority of the move from earnings. But regardless, I do think Walmart will continue its path down to the previous monthly low, which is at about 109. And then if 109 is lost, again, look at this range to the left-hand side. If you guys don't want to sell, that is entirely fine. But I just want you guys to take a look at these charts with zero bias and tell me that this is not an overextended chart. So again, it is your money. If you guys want to go long up here, you guys don't want to sell any of your assets, that is entirely fine. But I just want you guys, again, with zero bias, to look at any of these charts and tell me that these charts are not overextended. They have not retested a base once. Normal price action is something like this. You want to see bases retested. They have not retested any of these bases. So again, once we do start having these pullbacks, I think they will be pretty violent to the downside. So just be careful with your positioning. No reason to be getting hurt, especially if you caught majority of the move up on various different stocks, whether it was invested on SPY or if you have diversified positions on specific individual names. I'm sure you've done very well for yourself in the past few years. So again, no reason to give back these profits. You should be looking to, either protect your positions or just, sell. There's many different ways to go about it. So if you guys need help with any specific positions, how to protect yourself, shoot me a DM. I'll help you guys out. But ideally, I do think the markets are very exposed at this moment in time. Super overextended. We have a lot of political conflicts going on right now. If any overseas escalation with Iran or anything else happens, the entire market is going to tumble like a game of cards. So we'll see how this plays out. Eli Lilly is another name I'm interested in. This one's a little more expensive as far as options go. So one, I've been tracking it. I want to see a breakdown from these highs. We've been ranging for quite some time, but assuming we breach these lows, again, we have a super clean range to the left-hand side, and this one can pay out a massive amount. Me, myself, I'm a little more interested in J&J. I think this is a little more tradable. Spreads aren't ideal, but it's a lot cheaper than Eli Lilly, and we have this huge range to the left-hand side. We have some wicks unfilled from a few earnings ago down to here, so we'll see how that plays out. But ideally, I do want to see J&J much lower. So we'll see how this plays out. Uh, but I will be interested in taking some sells on this one. I already took some last week. They paid pretty well on that pullback we had on Friday. And if we do start breaking down from the top of this, this range, this has huge potential. Again, Eli Lilly also has a lot of potential, but this one's going to cost you a lot more on the premiums. Spreads on J&J are a bit wide, but since LLY is so much more expensive, the spreads there are going to cost you even more. JPM, this is another name. We took some sells off the highs. A lot of banks recovered, especially Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs recovered a lot of the downside. This is a messy chart. I didn't clean this chart up yet. Goldman Sachs recovered a lot, and we're still sitting towards those highs. So similar comments. We've been ranging into here. If we do get the breakdown from these ranges, again, just look left. We have massive, massive amounts of liquidity. Once we start breaking down from these ranges, we're going to have some pretty big pullbacks back down to these lows. So just be mindful. It does not matter what you're invested in, whether it is, technology sector, financial, commodities, you name it. I think the entire market is going to have a pullback. Some names will definitely get hit harder than others, but nothing is safe in my opinion. Consumer discretionaries don't matter. Everything is going to get hit. So you have seen some extra bids on names like J&J. In moments of weakness in the market, people are going to flee to safety. So you're going to see a lot of these quote unquote safer names getting bid up. But at the end of the day, nothing is safe. Ultimately, I do think everything will fall. Financials are performing a little better than credit. So Visa and MasterCard already had a bit of a pullback. Banks have been holding up a little better. But ultimately, again, they are all going to have a pretty big pullback down to these lows. So we'll see how this plays out. But credit is a little lower than banks. So I would prefer to take a financial name like JPM or something along those lines. BAC paid pretty well. Wells Fargo paid pretty well. JPM is a tiny bit higher. GS is also a little higher. So if you want to take either of those, JPM, GS, I think that's going to be a valid trade. Not saying Visa and MasterCard aren't, just ideally I would prefer to take one of these names that is a bit closer to the high. So JPM, again, down about 7% from the highs. Names like Visa, down about 15. So down double what JPM is down. I think it's a more attractive range on JPM. So we'll see how that plays out. And as we are speaking, we're having a pretty nice pullback on SPX. So again, as long as that sales trigger into 69.10 is respected this week, I would love to see some continuation and some selling pressure this week on SPY, SPX, and individual names. But again, it's still early. We're going to have a few days until NVDA. NVDA reports on Wednesday. So anything can happen. Small pullback, and then on NVIDIA, we can get that rally. So, don't count out the buys yet just because we're having a small pullback yet. You want to be super tactical this week. And again, we're at the mercy of the markets. Reporting after hours, whether you're long, short, or flat. Once that move comes, you have, not much to do. If you're trading futures or stocks, you have more leeway. But if you're in on options, you guys know once the bow closes, you got to lock it in until the next day. So this is one name I discussed. Mentioned shorting oil. USO had a small pullback. US Oil, CVX, Exxon also decent pullback off of these highs. Ideally, as long as we reject and close below previous weekly low, this is another name that has a huge range to the left-hand side. So just be mindful. Again, there's plenty of opportunity. Any of these names are pretty clean to trade. I'm interested in shorting names that are at all-time highs or, within or close to 52-week highs. Nothing wrong with shorting super weak names like Microsoft. I'm not saying you can't make money from it, but from a trade perspective, I'm way more attracted in shorting the names that are closer to the highs than the names that have already fallen 15, 20, 30%. So that's that. I don't want to make this video too long. again, the consensus is for the markets to chop much lower and keep dropping into, you know, for the rest of the year. Maybe not, but ideally by March 20th, which is about a month from today, I do think the markets will be significantly lowered. One thing I said again, NVDA can break out, so you want to protect yourself. If we get a small bounce into these highs, um, you know, the short dates are obviously going to get hit. The longer dates might be a little better. For example, let's say NVIDIA or SPY breaks out into these highs. Maybe it'll be a short-lived rally. Ideally, I don't think this will be long-lived. Uh, Maybe we pop into the highs same week, and then we open here on Thursday, and then we can get the sell. So we'll see. But even if they do sweep the highs, realistically, like I said, it's going to be a short-lived trade in my opinion. We already had one sweep of highs on NVIDIA, so realistically, I don't think they'll have another one. I think our move is lower, but I might be mistaken. We shall see. AVGO, similar comments, swept highs, reverted lower. So we may or may not get that sweep of highs on SPY, but ideally, I don't think we have to get a breakout. They may, but my bias is short. But again, just because my bias is short doesn't mean I'm going to go all in. I want to leave room to add. The weeklies will for sure take a hit. So if you're in a February 27th, for example, you're shorting here, we open up here, you're going to be crushed, just to be honest with you guys. But if you have time, you have the ability to scale in and add more to your positions at big discounts into those highs. So that is my goal. I do have a few positions as mentioned. Depending how this week goes, I'll see if I can add anything. But ideally, ultimately, I'm focused not on this week, not on guessing where NVIDIA is going. I'm not going to put my money on a guess on whether we're going up or down. You know, that's speculation. I ultimately have no idea where we're going. Do I want to see lower? Sure. But I'm not a wizard. I have no clue. So you're better off not speculating and gambling. Can you have a little bit of risk this week? That is totally fine. But my risk goes into the next coming months. So from coming into March all the way to May and June, this is what I want to see. So just because we don't dump from this specific moment in time down doesn't mean that we will not come down. So ideally short into the highs. If we get there, that's fine. Not a big deal. I'll love the discounts. But my focus from here on out is the next 2 to 3 months coming into March, April, May. So with that being said, yes, I'm short, but again, I'm not short for this week. I'm short for the next 3 months, and you guys should be as well. That'll help you protect yourself. You know, even if we pop, you'll be in a fine position. If you're in a weekly and we pop and we don't get the drop you're looking for, you're immediately going to be crushed on your portfolio. So be mindful. And again, as we are speaking, we have GJ coming down. We have SPX coming down. So we shall see how this week plays out. But so far, so good. I wanted to see a breakdown on GJ. We're getting that as we speak. And we're getting a bit of a firm up on the dollar. Hopefully they recover and push towards those highs. So again, we'll see how this week plays out. You know, hopefully this video helps. If not, shoot me a DM. You guys kind of know what the consensus is. Just wanted to make this video for a refresher. Anyone who, you know, hasn't been too active, you've been lost or whatever, you know. So hopefully this helps. Ask questions if you need them. And with specific positioning, I can help you guys too. But again, ultimately, we are not guessing where NVIDIA is going this week. We're just protecting ourselves on both sides. For the potential breakout and for the potential drop, leave extra money on the side to scale in later, and also grab extra time if possible. Weeklies are not the move. I'm not saying you can't make money on weeklies, but you guys know how I feel. I like trading bi-weekly to a month or even later on the dates. It gives you a lot more time to manage, sit on trades comfortably. So that's about it. I'll catch y'all. Tap in if you need some. Good luck to everybody this week. Another thing, I'll send a message in the chat, but I will be gone for half of this week. I will be traveling starting Wednesday for my birthday celebrations. Nothing crazy, but yeah, I'll be out the room. I'll take my laptop with me, so I'm not going to be completely MIA, but there will be no live streams Wednesday through Friday, most likely. So I'll be in the room the days before that, prep you guys for NVIDIA, try to get everyone set up. But yeah, ultimately, I will not be here second half of the week. And then, like I said, I'll do updates, just no lives. So good luck to everybody. God bless, and hopefully everyone does well. We'll see what happens this week, but this is probably gonna be the biggest week of earnings this year. So we'll see. Catch y'all.